Welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management, a weekly conversation with area leaders about how to persevere during uncertain times. Now here's your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi, and welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. We have a special guest. Congressman Tracey Mann is with us today, and many of you may not know this, but he's our first representative congressman, but he grew up in Gove County on a farm whose family still farms back there, now takes up residence in the big city of Salina. But I'm talking to him in Washington, D.C. Congressman, good to have you on our Forward Ever show.
Gary, thanks for having me. Boy, if there's ever a name of a show, leading in challenging times, it's appropriate for our discussion and what's going on right now. So,
well, we started this, Congressman, in during COVID, and certainly challenging there. But boy, you don't have to go too far on the headlines to see how complicated our world can be. And so, start out. Let's just go to Washington D.C. Just recently, and I know people that get deep into this know what went on, but you were voting for Speaker of the House, and that was a complicated effort. Washington was somewhat just stopped for a couple of weeks while that was happening. And you voted for Congressman Johnson, but in the process of doing it, then they called for you to vote. You said, I like Mike. Was that a relief kind of vote, or what was that all about?
Well, that's a great question. So, first, typically our votes, you put a card in a machine and it's very quick. Per the Constitution, to vote for Speaker, you got to stand up and say who you support. And so, we've done this many, many times, but I stood up and said, I like Mike. Honestly, one, everybody likes Mike. Mike's a good friend. But two, is kind of a nod of the tip of the hat to Eisenhower.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought of.
That's exactly right. It was kind of a tribute to Ike and the Eisenhower Center. So I stood up, to your point, said, I like Mike Johnson for Speaker. Sometimes you've got to try to lighten things up a little bit.
Well, I know I have the I like Ike pin, so we may have to come up with a whole round of I like Mike to make that work.
Hey, by the way, he's a great guy, good friend, servant leader, humble, faith-driven, conservative. I think as the country continues to get to know him, they're really going to like level-headed, thoughtful. He is exactly what the Congress and the country needs right now. So really excited that he's our speaker.
Well, it was interesting. It was a name that was somewhat unknown that came out of a pack of relatively known names. And then all of a sudden, here comes somebody, and he seems to be doing a nice job of getting a handle about. So your thought process on that, can he get through the next couple of things, which one is the bill to finance our government? Because that's going to be the biggest thing that has to happen. And that's less than 2 weeks away right now.
Yeah, no, I think he can. Very competent, great guy. It's interesting, I know him well, but realize most folks don't. But as they get to know him, they're really going to like him. But a lot of things to navigate. Here's the bottom line. We have divided government right now. Everyone knows this. We have Joe Biden's in the White House. The Democrats control the Senate, 49 to 51, so very tight margin. In the House, 435 members, and it's a 3-vote margin right now. So very, tight margins for everybody right now, but he's the right leader. He can bring people together. You're right. The biggest thing coming up here is government funding, a host of other issues as well. Pretty optimistic with his leadership.
So what is the next step for government funding? Where are we at on that?
Yeah, well, just to zoom out a little bit, so the fiscal year for the government ended on September 30th. Got extended by 45 days. So now the new date is actually November 17th, which is 2 weeks from now. There will be some kind of a short-term extension. The question is for how long and what that looks like. Understand that, in the House so far, after this week, we'll have gone through 8 or 9 of the 12 appropriations bills, which is about 80% of the funding for the government. So the big bills that fund the government have gone through the House side, need to get picked up on the Senate side, do a conference committee and work to get this resolved. I actually feel like we're sitting in a pretty good spot, but there'll have to be some sort of a short-term stopgap spending bill here come November the 17th.
You talked about leading in challenging times. One of the issues is there's so many things going on in the world. And the question mark, we can send money to different places, whether, we can choose the spots to send money to around the world. And then how do we keep money here where we need it for people in Kansas and other parts of our country as well? What are the headlines that you're running into when you're talking about Israel, supporting Israel, the Ukraine? How does that fit into the funding bill?
Yeah, when I say, big picture, Gary, as I see it, our priorities right now ought to be the following. One, we've got to reduce and cut spending. We're $33 trillion in debt. This is not sustainable. Two, we've got to secure our border, the southern border. Three, we've got to deal with the weaponization of the federal government. Four, we've got to support Israel. And five, we got to work on a farm bill. I mean, there's other priorities as well, but those are kind of the big five in my view, in various orders. The president put forward a proposal to basically fund to the tune of $100 billion, Ukraine, Israel, the southern border, some other things as well. But of that, almost 2/3 of those dollars would go to Ukraine. And I strongly support, we got to secure our border way past time we do that. I also support Israel. And so Speaker Johnson, rightly so, is dividing these things out as he should. And up here later today is the bill to help support Israel to the tune of $14 billion. I will vote for that. But Ukraine spending as it sits today without more transparency and accountability for those dollars is hard. That's hard for some. That's a hard thing for me to support right now.
As a farm boy, does billions kind of roll off your tongue and my tongue pretty easy when you get to Washington D.C. Is that ever just amazing to you?
It's shocking. So understand in legislation when we see bills, and it never says a billion or a trillion, it spells it out. And so like when they jam through the American Rescue Plan, 1.9 trillion is 1,900, 000, 000, I mean, the amount of money that this town spends, which is not sustainable. And I would say the biggest threat to America is our debt. This year we are going to start spending, or very quickly, we're going to start spending more, Gary, in interest on the debt than we will spend to fund our military. And this is very, very concerning. We've got to get this under control.
Let's tackle a couple of things here. And I know you have some votes to do. It's very busy now trying to get things in place. And so just want to respect your time. But a couple of things I want to talk about. There's a magnitude of big rules out. One of them is called WOTUS, where you put a whole bunch of things together. Explain that to those who may not, but it involves fertilizer, liquid fuel, all those things that farmers need. And you know what? People listening to this, most of them are related to, know of, or really like farmers. And so
that's right.
How are you going about that?
As am I. My dad and brother farm full-time together, as do my uncles, everybody in our family. So WOTUS, for your listeners that have not followed this, stands for Waters of the U.S., which is part of the Clean Water Act. So when the Clean Water Act was passed decades ago, and Gary, everybody's for clean water, right? Mm-hmm. But the Biden administration came along, actually the Obama administration came along and really tried to further the scope of the Clean Waters Act. Trump then rolled back those regulations. Now Biden is trying to push those regulations forward. And if it gets implemented, what Biden wants to do is he would give the federal government jurisdiction over farm ponds, drainage ditches. I mean, way beyond the scope of what the federal government ought to be doing. So all of that shorthand is called WOTUS, which is the federal government's desire to overregulate through the Clean Water Act. A case went to the Supreme Court. The SACA case struck down this effort, but now the Biden administration is back at it, going about it a different way. So that's WOTUS. These regulations very bad for agriculture producers, very bad for industry, municipalities, a lot of folks all over the big first, all over America.
One of the things that I know when you look into the farming side of things, and I wish if the federal government's going to do this, they could provide rain, provide moisture for those farm ponds. If you could fill them up, that would solve a lot of problems, especially out in our part of the world. And I know your family deals with the same things as well. But talk a little bit about what the support for farmers, and if somebody out here is listening and says, how do I voice my opinion? Because many times it seems we're a long ways away.
Yeah, reach out to my office, reach out to me. So first off, Gary, I do a town hall in every county every year. So, I was in Ellis County this summer, but I do 61 town halls every year. I'll be doing town halls again next year, but don't even wait for, so I will come to you. Also, reach out to me at any time. DC, Manhattan, Dodge City, any of our offices is really important. My job is to advocate for agriculture and our Kansas conservative values as I try to represent the 750,000 residents of our district as well as we possibly can.
My next question is those town hall meetings. We're going to take a break, Congressman. Come back. We'll talk about what you're hearing. You had your top five. I'm curious what the top five are that you're hearing when you're out on the road. Our guest today is Congressman Tracey Mann, represents us here in the 1st District. We'll be back with more after this.
The most successful investors are those that can keep their emotions in check and take a longer-term view at what portfolios will be worth 3 to 5 years down the road. I'd say that's the most important in determining what investor outcomes are. Market corrections will continue in the future. We've seen many of them over the years, only to see equity prices rise higher, and that'll be the case in the future.
Worth Wealth Management, enhancing lives and strengthening families.
Welcome back to Forward Ever, leading in challenging times. And we talked about it being a challenging time, and one of our representatives in D.C., our 1st District Congress representative, is Tracey Mann. He's on the program with us right here. And Congressman, we went into the break talking about your top five. I'm curious what that lines up when you're out traveling over all of the counties, and you have the biggest district in the state of Kansas. But you're going each place, you're talking to people. What are you hearing?
Sure. Our district's the 11th largest in the country. So it's a lot of miles. Honored to get to represent everybody. Those same priorities, I formulate those priorities because that's what I hear about from folks at town halls and people that I'm talking to about all over the district. The number one thing that came up at our town halls this year, Gary, and as I'm out talking to people, the number one thing by far is the southern border. To see our wide open southern border, millions of people come, and we don't even know who's coming across. And I'm for I'm for legal immigration, but this system and process we have makes no sense. And now we're learning, we have folks from countries on the terrorist watch list. We know we have some bad actors that have come across. Very, very concerning to me. It's infuriating that the administration has not been willing to secure the border. We've actually passed on the House side a really good bill called HR 2. That would secure the border and really deal with our immigration policy. Optimistic that we can get that pushed through here. Finally, when you have the mayor of New York City and these urban areas that are talking about how bad the border is, it's finally, I think, getting the attention of the White House, but it's been a long time, too long in coming.
One of the things I know as a congressman, you talk about challenging times. The input that you get from so many places, now the Israeli war that's going on and doing that, how do you find the time to manage and make sure the focus gets on things that you need done and maybe even make some progress on those things when there's so many things coming from outside?
Yeah, I just got to be laser focused and make sure, one, that I'm listening to folks in Kansas, or Kansans, and two, that you're accurately communicating those, here in Washington, D.C. And so what does that look like? That looks like specific piece of legislation. It looks like a lot of conversations. It looks like figuring out, who is the committee chair that's going to impact an, stepped up basis for agriculture. That's the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. His name's Jason. So it's going to talking to Jason, make sure that he knows how the stepped up basis impacts our Kansas ag producers. So it's just kind of bringing, putting on your pads every day. It's football season. You got to pad up every day and go to work. But that's what we do. That's what every farmer and practically everybody in the 1st District of Kansas does. And so the least I can do is to work as hard as they work, but work right here in Washington, D.C.
Well, what are the things that would make your life easier? Because sometimes it seems when you watch television, you listen to the news, it's just chaos going on. How can we help make your life easier?
A different president of the United States. Honestly, so much of what I do, Gary, it's the Biden administration and all these priorities they have and the things they're trying to jam through that are not good for Kansas, overwhelmingly not supported by folks in our district. If you could solve that problem for me, Gary, that's the number one. I'm being a little facetious, but it's the truth.
I'm sure there's some regulation around that too, because if one thing I hear from businesses and people is there's so much regulation already. Just to, even if you want to start a business, if you want to hire somebody, if you want to try to do something, the regulation that you go through, I'm not sure what percentage of any sort of profits or a business go to that, but that's one of those things when you talk about WOTUS and those new rules that could come into place. That's one of the issues. It's one thing to go out and run your business. Another thing when you have to have 2 or 3 people there to manage the documentation that goes along with governmental rules.
You're exactly right. I'm a small business guy. I've owned multiple small businesses, and you think about, Gary, the drain on our economy just from compliance with all the regulations. I mean, ask any of our rural hospitals that are trying to keep going. Ask our ag producers, our Main Street businesses, the regulations that keep piling up and being added on to. Tremendous drag on our economy. And it's getting to the point that it's such a burden. I get most discouraged when I talk to somebody who's been successful in business or thinking about starting a business, and they say, it's just the brain damage isn't worth it. All the paperwork, all the fights I've got to fight. That is very, very concerning to me, because that's the antithesis of what this country was founded upon.
Last question, and I ask this to a lot of the people that I talk to. When you talk about leadership, it takes some mentors along the way to say, hey, how do I do this job right? How do I make a difference in Washington, D.C.? Who have been the leaders that you've worked with, worked for, been around that's helped position you to do the right job for those of us that you're representing here in Kansas?
Yeah, a lot of people, and I'm a big believer in mentors. The first person that comes to my mind is our former governor, Jeff Collier. I served as lieutenant governor under Jeff, from Hayes, by the way. And his desire to serve people, to lead, to bring an energy to that, to build a team. He's been a tremendous mentor. In fact, I just spent a little time with him here a few days ago. Tremendous mentor to me, a host of other folks as well. I try to find what are individual characteristics that I admire in somebody, and try to go and ask them, hey, teach me about, this specific thing, because it seems like we all have strengths, and to try to learn, especially from other people's strengths, has been a huge thing for me. So it's great question.
Well, Congressman, thanks for joining us. I know you have a very busy schedule, and thanks for you and your staff carving out some time to be able to do that. Hope we can do it again. In the meantime, keep doing a great job for us in Washington, D.C.
Thanks a lot for having me. Appreciate what you do, and full steam ahead.
All right, let's do it. This is our congressman representing us in the 1st District. His name's Tracey Mann, and leading us in challenging times. You're listening to the program Forward Ever, brought to you by Worth Wealth Management, where you can live with confidence. I'm Gary Shorman.
Thanks for joining us for Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management. Join us right here next week for another episode with host Gary Shorman. Until then, remember to move forward ever, backward never.